My name is S.C. Toe, or Samson Toe. I have the privilege of serving this congregation as its director of music. And because of that, you know I'm going to have us sing a hymn. So would you please pick up the hymnal right next to you in your chair and turn to hymn number 463. 463. I'd like to sing the first verse and the last verse. 463. Find a permanent place up here in the loft. Who has never sat in this choir loft before? Oh, wow. So I see a lot of faces that I'm not familiar with that haven't raised their hands. So good to have you back up here. Again, my name is S.C. Toe. I serve as the music director. That means a lot of different things, and one of those things is they did not hire me to speak. I am not a great public speaker. I am, though, a teacher, so I do like to teach. I like to have discussions and conversations, so that's going to be the format for these next couple of weeks. I'll ask questions, and I will wait and wait and wait until I get a response. I have a notepad and a pencil up here, so if someone has a question for me, which I probably will not know the answer, I'll write that question down and address it at a different time, all right? I'd like to start by talking just a little bit. I trained as a pianist primarily, studying K through 12 music ed, piano pedagogy, and orchestral conducting. So basically, I'm a piano teacher. I like making music. I like singing. I like conducting instruments. It's just all great to me. Love it. My background in the church, my mother came out of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. My father came out of the Catholic Church. When they married, they decided to raise their children in a non-denominational fundamental setting. I'm one of 5 kids, way too many kids, and you know, we all kind of were raised in that same setting. I have to say this is my first appointment in a Presbyterian church permanently as its music director. I've subbed before in Presbyterian churches as an organist or as a guest conductor. But I've never held a permanent placement. The majority of my career has been with the United Methodist Church. My first appointment there really began to feel a call and a sense of home in that church, and it really allowed me to really hone my skills as technician at the keyboard, as a conductor on the podium, but also as an administrator of a program which has considerations that you might not think about when you say you want to be a church musician, like administrating a department, community engagement, and being a liaison between folks on the staff and in the choirs and in the congregation. And also a curator of the arts and mediums that were not so familiar to me. So other things inside of worship services that weren't music. Believe it or not, there's other things than music in a church service. So you have to learn a lot pretty quickly. And the Methodist Church allowed me to scatter the floor with mistakes for many years and learn those things. And I'm still scattering the floor with mistakes and still learning, hence the paper and pencil. A special congregation I wanted to talk to you about is St. Luke's United Methodist in Memphis, Tennessee. That church reminds me a lot of Reed Memorial. It's a 154-year-old congregation with a great history, had such wonderful ministers that came through there, wonderful pulpiteers that graced its podium. It also had wonderful music ministers that I found rather intimidating as a young 23-year-old stepping into that position. Wilson Mount, who is the conductor of the weekly Methodist Hour, which was a syndicated program on the radio. When I went to St. Luke's, they used to talk about the round sound of Mount, and that was Wilson's signature sound. There was also Merlin Johnson, who brought graded choir programs to that church. He instituted kindergarten music all the way through elementary and then high school. They began singing at the early service and would tour in the summer times. He really had a heart for not just traditional church music, but also for the kids. And it was through that work that we saw such great sound in the chancel choir later on, because those kids then continued to sing through college, and then when they would come back from school, they would join the choir. So he really did great work laying foundations there. The Reverend Amy Martin was a phenomenal thematic programmer. The music programs that she would program brought so many folks into the church, and it amazes me, and I still look back at those old programs and wonder, how did that come to your mind? Who would have thought to do whatever it is she thought to do? But I tell you, her creativity just astounded me. The internationally famed organist Diane Meredith Belcher was the church organist at St. Luke's in the 80s. Blows my mind. I could not believe it. Dr. Marcy Mittelstadt, who was by trade a university dean, came on as music director for about 10 years. She was a masterful administrator. And for those of you who know musicians, we are not necessarily innately organized or well planned out folks. So it's really rare to find a person like Dr. Mittelstadt, who was such a gifted musician and also such a very gifted leader and organized leader. But the name that struck the most fear into my heart was that of Gary Allen Smith. Dr. Smith was music director for 10 years at St. Luke's, and when he left, he went up the road to Nashville to work at one of the publishing houses, Methodist publishing houses there in Nashville. His works are really well known. They are staples in church music, not just Methodism, but church music across the board, choral and solo literature. And a couple of his compilations can be found in this book here. He was the editor of the United Methodist Hymnal. Wonderful, wonderful gentleman. He also went on to be the chief editor for the 2 supplement hymnals in the Methodist Church. The first one, The Faith We Sing, of which I stole the name of this class from, and then the other one was Worship Together. So in my mind, Dr. Smith was a successful music director. And I always had a fascination about folks, no matter what the field, but how is it that they became so successful in the field that they're working? And I had the opportunity to ask Gary once, and I'm sure he doesn't even remember this conversation, but I asked him, how is it that you were so successful? How is it that you got so many folks involved at every level here at the church? And he said, it's extremely simple. They always say that. It's extremely simple. You must make them sing. Like, all right, well, that sounds simple on the surface, but I'm the kind of person who likes to think, and I generally have a lot more questions that follow that initial question. And the first one was, well, how? You know, there's so many considerations. How do you make them sing? So, you know, I jotted down a couple of thoughts. You know, you want to program songs that people know. That's hugely important. No one wants to go into a place, a concert, a church service, and sit and listen to new music that's stretching you constantly. You want to hear some of the favorites, right? The new music that you hear, it needs to be easily taught. You need to be able to jump on pretty quickly to that. And then also new songs need to be introduced in a very strategic way. Maybe the organist plays it as a prelude or postlude for several weeks. Maybe the choir sings it as an anthem. There's all kinds of strategic ways to teach congregations new songs, and also you need to do it sneakily too sometimes. And then also songs that people connect with. You want to do songs that people, there is a meaning behind it for folks. And now a question to you, how do you make them sing? Any thoughts? Ah, yes. Make them sing a cappella. That's great. Any other thoughts?
Sing something they know.
Familiar, yep. True, true. Yes?
I knew a fella in California named Johann Anderson who had written the songbook for Young Life before the songs were projected on the wall. And he would teach leaders how to lead in singing, and they would stand up and he'd get them moving.
Movement.
Yep.
Movement. Very important, especially younger folks, kids choirs. Movement is extremely important. Any others?
I used to make my former congregation learn the first verse so they could get the melody during announcements. And I would just say, this is coming.
I like
and
that.
they'd at least sung one verse. They had an idea. And then we would jump in.
So warning them it's coming.
Yeah.
I like that. You know, half of these notes are for my own edification later on. Great. Wonderful. Yeah, so there are a number of considerations. I liked, who said make them sing a cappella? Who was that? Was that you? Wonderful. And we're going to talk more about that in a coming week when we focus in a little bit more on instrumental music in the church with the organ. But wonderful, great ideas. Now, when I approach a church service and I think about what hymns it is that I'd like to program, you know, there's many things I want. I want the congregation to really sing out. I want the congregation to see a connection of the overall flow of the service. What is it the minister's preaching on? What is the text of the day? What's the season? What's going on in the world? I want to see connections, and sometimes you don't really see that. I do at my desk when I'm programming, but then I stop and I ask myself, well, why is it that they didn't get it? And oftentimes it's because I've never shared with folks why it is we're singing what we're singing. And I'll come back to that point in just a moment. I also want to convey a deep theological meaning, and I also want to inspire spiritual growth through what it is that we are singing. Because singing is an extremely important part of our faith. Now, if I were to ask you, does this church sing? Is Reed Memorial a singing congregation? What would you say? I love it. Occasionally. Things we know.
We're okay with the familiar ones, but then we lag. That's why I thought your leaving the organ off forced us to carry on. We realized the absence of the organ sound, so we wanted to fill the air.
Yes. Yes. Great. You know, I think you all sound like probably some of the most self-aware congregation members that I've ever talked to, because generally if I ask a church, are you a singing church? Every church, yes, absolutely, we are a singing church. Oh, you can't hear the organ because we sing so loud. I will say, I have served churches in which I had not heard one note come from the congregation. And you know, there's a lot of reasons for that. Location plays a huge role. I am a northerner. I love the north, I love the south, I love everywhere. But you know, I have to admit, my brethren in the north, we don't sing very much. They like to kind of listen. They step back and observe what's happening. And the church I was serving as a young man, I was so bored just playing a hymn, and you know, it was a very small choir, nobody was singing, you know, and I thought to myself, I've got to do something different. So I started playing a lot of alternative harmonizations, which we'll talk more about too next week. But just to kind of keep it interesting. And then after serving that church, I moved to a Mennonite congregation in which their tradition is a cappella music. And so after about 1 or 2 weeks, I got sat down and said, you know, it would be fantastic if you would cut out a verse or two on every hymn. And I remember thinking, that's a nightmare. If I stop playing, 1, we're not going to hear anything because nobody sings, and 2, you guys are going to go flat. But you know, whatever. I'm just the musician. I'll stop playing. And I'll be darned. They stayed in tune. There was beautiful 4-part harmony. And it was the first time in my life that I thought, you know, congregations can do this. Even if they don't know that they can do it, most times, they can do this. And so that's kind of where my philosophy of not always pushing at the organ comes from. Now, there are occasions in which you should push at the organ. It's a very delicate balancing act. Again, we'll talk about that next week. Making the congregation sing through your creative registrations or volume of the instrument. You play louder, they sing louder, in theory. But there also comes to a point where it's like you give up because you know you can't outbeat the organ, so you just stop singing. So it's a balancing act there. But again, every church says they're a singing congregation. There are a couple of denominations that truly do have a very strong singing tradition, an a cappella singing tradition, and that's because maybe they don't have instruments. Mennonite churches, they have instruments, but again, they started in situations where they didn't. The Church of Christ, the Methodist Church, especially in England, and that was because one of their founders was a musician and responsible for writing a lot of Christian hymnody today. So there are some traditions that do really emphasize singing, but most congregations are about middle of the road, depending upon where you are in the country, to not really singing at all. Also, the type of service that we deal with. Are we talking traditional music, or are we talking more current music, which we'll talk about in just one moment? But I want to talk about the Christian song. Christianity itself truly is a singing religion. I was thinking back years ago, I was driving in the car and I heard on NPR them talking about the commandment in the song, or the commandment in the Bible that was given the most was to sing. And they named a number. And I have looked and looked and looked through the years. I cannot find anybody who has counted the number of times it's commanded for us to sing. I know it's a lot of times. But I do know that one of the earliest recordings of Christianity in writing was by, what's his name? Pliny the Young, and it's around 111 AD. And he was talking to a Roman superior, and he was asking them, how is it that he's supposed to handle and deal with these new Christians? And that wasn't the word he used at the time, but how is it that he's supposed to handle them? He said they gather early in the morning, and they're singing joyfully to one another and with one another, singing hymns to this Christ as if he's a god. And that's interesting to me, that the first recording in writing of our faith deals with singing, and how from the world's perspective, the pagan perspective, it was a little odd to them. So that really sticks with me. I hope it does with you as well. Now, the church was not always a place of congregational singing, even though it really did begin that way, but not always. You know, I think about the words of the Reverend Fred Pratt Green, who was a British hymnist. His hymn, "When in Our Music God is Glorified." Let me share a couple of the text with you. When in our music God is glorified, and adoration leaves no room for pride, it's as if though the whole creation cried, hallelujah. And did not Jesus sing a psalm that night, when utmost evil strove against the light? Then let us all sing for whom he won the fight, hallelujah. I love that hymn. You'll see that in coming weeks. But you know, it's such an important aspect of our faith at the start, but we went through a period in which singing was not for the congregation. It's a very sad period, and this really was the start of something called the worship wars. The worship wars is a term that kind of was floated in the 1970s, and it really took hold in the 1980s and 90s. And folks kind of associated then with, oh, what kind of music are we singing? Are we singing out of a hymnal? Are we singing on the wall? You know, the words on the wall. What is it that we're doing? But truly, I think the first person who brought the worship wars into context was a nun by the name of Hildegard von Bingen. And she was a German nun who was born in 1098. She died in 1179. She was a writer, she was a philosopher, and she was a composer. And she was a woman. This was really different for that time, right? Hildegard von Bingen brought this radical idea to church music that people just could not abide with. It was just unthinkable. It was leading people to hell. It was just awful. She introduced something called a drone. Anybody have an idea what a drone is? A drone.
We're not talking about the ones that fly around.
No, not that kind of kind of like a humming, like just, you know, maybe a note that just stays consistent. Before, you know, church music was just a melody, right? There was nothing else. But now she had this idea, let's have some folks sing this drone while there's a melody happening. So it's a move from monophonic singing or music, which is just one line, to polyphonic, 2 lines. We can't deal with that. That's just too radical. So she, in her time, unfortunately, was just looked at horribly because she wanted drones. And we still sing her music today. It's funny because she was such a radical at that time. Nowadays, you go to very ancient churches, you know, medieval churches, and they're doing her music, and it's looked at as, oh, this is boring. But it was radical for that time. And it makes me kind of think, what would she, if she were still around, would think about the arguments and squabbles that we have amongst ourselves in these worship wars today? Which I now want to ask you, what are some examples of the worship wars that you see in the current Christian church?
Blue versus the red.
Blue versus the red.
Well, it would have been blue versus the kind of maroon, and then now it's blue versus the red.
Yeah, you know, the collection of hymns that churches sing, that is a very sticky situation. And it is for every community. What else? Anything else?
Should we have contemporary music?
Oh boy, can you say that word here? Can you have contemporary music? That's a good one. Anything else?
Can you have contemporary music with a live band?
Yeah.
Oh, the instrumentation used in the service. Should we have a band? That's interesting.
And dare we say scream? With the
Woo. I'm looking at choir members and they're, oh no. It's time to go to rehearsal.
Right, yeah, or do we do away with the hymnals? Yeah, that's a huge thing.
Now let me push you even further. Outside of the context of music and worship, what are some examples of the worship wars? Are there any?
Well, theologically, there's tons.
Sure. Theologically. What about, should we use liturgy? Should we have printed liturgy that we do every week versus not so much? Not so much. Should we have flowers? What's the purpose of candles? What about the folks that walk in, the kids at the beginning of the service to light the candles? What's the meaning? What's the purpose behind all of that? Very interesting thoughts. And you know, generally I try to stay as far away from those discussions as possible. And as I was writing this, I thought, what am I doing? But I couldn't stop myself. Let me play devil's advocate. Going back to the music component, let me share a text with you. Oh, the overwhelming, never endless, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, flights till I found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. I like poetry, I like reflecting on what people say, what people write. And to me, that's a moving statement. And as a traditional music director, I shock myself sometimes. That comes from a contemporary song that's done in churches today. Here's another text I want to share with you. The Prince of Darkness grim, we tremble not for him. His rage we can endure, for lo, his doom is sure. One little word shall fail him, and that word above all earthly power, no thanks to them, abideth. The Spirit and the gifts are ours, through him who with us sideth. Let goods and kindred go, this mortal life also. The body they may kill, God's truth abideth still. His kingdom is forever. Now, that's a very familiar hymn, A Mighty Fortress is Our God. And that text also gets me. And both of those texts kind of strike me with that same kind of, wow. You know, theologically, I think hymnody just moves me so much, but so does some contemporary literature. And I find, maybe me personally, I wonder, again, I'm not taking any sides, I wonder, maybe it's the singability. Again, going back to Dr. Smith, make them sing. I find singing just go outside of the church, listening to the radio. There's music I love listening to on the radio, and I try to sing to in a car, and it just doesn't go well. It does not go well. There is a reason that we've been singing hymns for years and years and years. The pattern, the format is participatory. It's written in a way that folks can be able to sing. But just playing devil's advocate, some thoughts there. There are plenty of modern music in the church that I find extremely moving. Does anybody have any examples yourself? Any songs that really just get you? That's current church music.
Well, I was just wondering, and this hopefully goes with what you're saying, how long does it take before something that was contemporary Christian music, like Michael W. Smith or Amy Grant, or very early on, sort of more well-known Christian music singers and composers, how long does it take? Because some of those are now in our hymnals.
Sure, yeah. How long does it take for new stuff to become old stuff?
To become like traditional.
Yes, great question. And again, that's kind of what I'm thinking about in the context of Hildegard von Bingen, who was just this crazy radical who now is this boring person who only had 2 notes at a time. That's a great question. Is there an answer to that? I don't know. I don't think there is. I think maybe what we're used to, if we sang something as a child, that to us is the old standards, where maybe it was brand new when we were children and we didn't realize that. So a lot of things maybe in the 1950s, 1960s, that was brand new, that folks from that generation kind of looked down upon. Nowadays is looked at as, oh, these are the old standards of the faith that we must sing. That's a great question. Any other thoughts on that? Yes.
The old standards, if you take the time to look at the words, it helps you remember. It helps you, I mean, a lot of scripture can be remembered through song that you cannot remember for the life of you, just as words. And I think the music lends its ability to remind you what the words mean.
It's very true. I learned scripture as a kid through song, absolutely. There's something about music that those pathways that form in your mind run deeper and last longer. My grandmother, before she passed, had Alzheimer's, and she didn't even know who I was. I recall our last Christmas together going to see her, and there was a piano in the room, and I said, let's sing some hymns. So we sat down, I played Christmas hymns. Without a hymnal, she was able to sing verse after verse of everything. And afterwards, she said, young man, because again, she didn't know who I was, young man, next time you need to let me know in advance if you'd like to do a performance. I prefer to rehearse ahead of time. Yeah, I think music is this powerful tool that helps us to remember things. And I think, yes, it's absolutely right that the lessons and things that are taught through music, especially as we're young, stick with us. But I'm gonna go back and say it's an interesting thing to consider. At what point do those new things kind of become old standards? And something I struggle with, and I also challenge myself to kind of keep in my mind in programming church music. Now the church, as I said, wasn't always a place where congregational singing was alive. There was that time in which the song was not for the people. There was a time in which the word of God was not for the people. You went and you listened to ministers read it to you, if they even read it to you, and give you thoughts. But it wasn't really for the common person to read and to study on their own. It wasn't until great reformers came along in which the people really regained the liturgy. That word liturgy literally means the people's work, right? We reclaimed our song. In some traditions, it's interesting that the music directors call it the cantor. The Lutheran, our Lutheran brothers and sisters, the cantor, it's the people, the keeper of the people's song. Doesn't matter if you're at the organ or conducting the choir, you're just the cantor. And I kind of like that simplicity, and it also kind of keeps in your mind what your role is, the people's song. Sure, I direct a choir, sometimes I play the organ, you know, but also what exactly is my primary purpose? And it is to get you singing. I really have two choirs, up here and out there. And the choir up here is to support the choir out there. So that was an interesting point I read in a book years ago. So again, reclaiming the song through the reformers, not only the word, but the song. I have a question for you. What is Reed's song? We've talked about the Christian song, we've talked about denominational songs. What is Reed Memorial Presbyterian Church's song?
There it is.
That was perfect. Don't have it. Interesting.
Amazing Grace.
Amazing Grace. Why do you say Amazing Grace? I'm not disagreeing, I'm just curious.
I say Amazing Grace because it exemplifies, to Charlie Moore, a strong faith-based community and belief. And to me, that hymn, this congregation, sort of come together.
Amazing Grace. I like that. Any other thoughts?
I also like Joy, 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 gathering in the heart. And I was just thinking, as you were talking, and to our two ministers there, what is, how would you feel it more successful if when the congregation files out, we're humming the music or well, I was supposed to, if we're doing the music going out versus contemplating the message that we heard. And I thought, that would make it interesting, because you said that you tried to put your music in harmony, supportive to the message that's being told. Our closing hymn, in my mind, hearing you speak, like the closing hymn should complement that. So the combination of as we lead with that music in our mind, but it's also complementing the message that we got. That's quite a challenge.
That would be a challenge. And it's interesting, we'll talk more, again, we maybe should have started with the organ. We're going to talk about next week the format of worship services. And you know, it's different too, different congregations, the way, what you're allowed to change, what you're not allowed to change, who you have to ask to change. Now, I'm new, and it's easiest to ask forgiveness because, hey, I didn't know, I've only been here for a couple of weeks. But they're coming from a Methodist church. I've learned rather quickly there's this thing called a worship committee and a session, and it's a good idea to run your thoughts by them before you change things. So, but you know, that we're going to talk about format of the service next week, and the role of the organ, leaving, coming, contemplating, what historically has happened at this congregation, what could change, what might not change. It's a very, very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Any others? Again, what is Reed Memorial's song?
A mighty fortress.
A Mighty Fortress. Very cool.
Flaming face.
Are you telling me I play too slowly? A Mighty Fortress. Gotcha. Now, you know, I'm going to share with, it's the darndest thing this morning. Well, before I came to this church, I was researching the church, as most folks would, and I found something online talking about a group of, and they describe themselves as stalwart, progressive Christ followers from the First Presbyterian Church of Augusta, gathered to study God's word, to spread it to its neighboring community, and they sang. And it was fascinating to me what it is that they sang. And when I walked in this morning and Miss Ann came in and she shared with me this book. And again, I could not find where I had read it. And it talks about it right on this first page. It was How Firm a Foundation. Now, if you recall my first Sunday here, the middle hymn was How Firm a Foundation. Reverend Ellsworth Moran was kind enough to allow me to change that middle hymn to that because I thought the text was great. It was kind of a way to rededicate what it is we do in the music ministry, how firm a foundation, what it is we're built on. It's Christ. And I thought to myself, is that Reed's song? I don't know. Is there just one song that's Reed's song? I don't know. Just very interesting thoughts to me. Now, and before I go, I do want to ask you one more thing. How can you aid in singing that song?
Actually sing it.
Sing it, yeah. Sing it loudly, sing it forcefully, yes.
Embrace it.
What else? Joyfully, sing it joyfully, yes. How else? Do I mean just come up here and sing in the choir? I would love it if you all came and joined the choir, but I know that that's not for everyone. There's all kinds of factors to consider in joining the choir. And that's not for everyone, but
sing it outside that door.
Sing it outside the door. That's great.
This is a light on a hill, shedding, glory, but shedding its light throughout this community. And it's one thing for us to do with people we know and are comfortable with, and we don't share our views, and know when to say amen. But when you go out there and turn left, you go down the hill, or right, you go or back in the neighborhood, you've got people that don't share that same experience with you. So when you sing How Firm a Foundation, and you say, my church set that for me and I'm trying to follow that in my, we got a lawyer back there that says something in my legal practice. Or I try to set that in my, whatever practice it is. That's an message.
I like that. Sing it outside these walls. Now, I think everybody truly has an answer to give, and I'm going to challenge you to go away with that this week. How is it that you can aid in singing Reed Memorial's song? Folks, thank you so much for spending some time with me this morning, and I look forward to seeing you next week.